First baptism of fire was a mortar that they called the boxcar. It was a huge, huge mortar that you could actually see it in the air.
Wow.
Flying. And when it landed, there was probably 15, 20 feet across and 10 feet deep.
The shell hole?
Shell hole from
Is that right?
one mortar. The nights were somewhat tougher than the days because you didn't know what was out there, and the Japanese were intent on the infiltration, either single or in larger groups. And we had the benefit of flares. We shot up flares often in order to light the area. They would sometimes walk in, and they'd get an American helmet to give a little different silhouette from their helmet. And some of them could speak English well enough to say, "Don't shoot, it's me, Joe." And you really didn't take much of a chance of anyone above ground at night, unless we were doing something that was a planned. If someone was hit, well, I'd holler out medic and away I'd go. But other than that, there were other night incidences. But another unusual thing that I started to say, there was a group coming towards us in civilian clothing, waving a white flag. When actually we had never had the chance to take a prisoner. No one would surrender. And when they got close enough, the front ones leaned over and they had a machine gun strapped on their back.
Boy.
And that's what happened. Well, when you have those things happen, you get very wary and conscious of anything.
You could never it seemed like you could never let your guard down.
No,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, you try to always observe what is out of the normal of what you're looking at. In early May, and it lasted most of May, we had a lot of rain. It rained, seemed like every day and night as well. And it got so that we weren't really sure that our rifles would always fire. So we used my .45 to stand guard a lot of nights. And we could kind of keep it hidden out of the dirt and mud and all. But it was, that's how the night went.
So you laid in this hole that was full of water and mud, and
yeah, we bail it out with our helmets and
geez.
Maybe get some sleep. But it wasn't unusual to wake up in 1 or 2 inches of water.
Now, when you talk ground taking and moving, are you talking hundreds of yards at a time, miles or feet, or how were you gauge your movement? I guess for us,
It was yards.
Yards.
Yes.
Oh, jeez.
Yes. And I was wounded on June 13th, and the island was secured on the 23rd. So I missed the last 10 days of it.
But roughly 2 months on the front line then.
Yeah, but yes, something like that. And we were making an assault that morning, and I had just picked up a litter and put it on my shoulder, and we were getting some small arms fire and some mortars also, and it was probably shrapnel that got me, couldn't tell. I was hitting the arm and the back, and I was walking wounded, so I went back to the field hospital.
I can't imagine very painful injury or.
Well, sure, yes, it was somewhat, but they treated it and gave me a shot of morphine, and I had a good night's sleep.
Well, that was the question I was kind of leading up to. You're roughly on the front lines for 2 months. Were you guys ever relieved to go back and do a little R&R and recuperate, or was there any gaps where you could get back?
Yes, we went in reserve one time, and reserve, of course, is half a mile back or something like that. And that time we did get a hot meal. That was the only hot meal. Otherwise, our rations were the canned sea rations and some biscuits in them. The biscuits were so hard. It's a wonder we didn't break our teeth on those. And we did get a few K rations at the last. And there was a period in May when the roads were so impassable we couldn't get anything. They gave us some airdrops. They dropped food and ammo to us. And then I went to a hospital, a large tent hospital that was fairly close to the shore above the bay where the Navy was getting all of the kamikazes. And that night they had another attack, and a piece of flak came through the roof of the tent, and the man about 3 feet from me was killed. It went right through him.
Go ashore on the one side of the ship on the cargo nets, and we had a kamikaze plane hit the other side of the ship, and it wiped out our headquarters company. One position where the 6th Marines on our right were so anxious to take this one hill that they left a pocket of Japanese in one of the burial caves behind us. And we made the top of the hill next to them, and the Japanese came out behind us and proceeded to pick us off one at a time with their knee mortars, which they were very good at. And a company of infantry is about 160 men, and I was one of 16 that were able to walk. They were all not casualties as far as being killed, but I was one of 16 that could walk off that mountain.
Wow.
So I'm very blessed. There were a couple times when we were forced to go across a large expanse of open area, and they decided to do that after dark. Of course, everybody had the password was wonderful pickle, and the Japanese could not pronounce that. So you knew, even though they might know wonderful pickle, that couldn't say it right.
Yeah, right. The
And but we were going across this expanse that was pretty well exposed, you know, where they could see us if it had been daylight. And I know there was a fellow that dodged in front of me to miss a shell hole, and he got right in front of me and got hit, so that that bullet had my name on it, but he took it for me.
Wow.
The closer we got to the south end of the island, we ran into the Imperial Japanese Marines, and they were all 6 foot or better.
Really?
And another happened to be in the foxhole with a buddy of mine that was the company cook. And so our foxhole was right at the top of the hill, and there was a path leading up to the top. And one flare went off, light, and here, standing right over our foxhole, was a Japanese soldier. And of course, it was as much of a shock to him as it was to us, and he wheeled around and took off immediately. But it's things you remember.
Yeah.
And one area, our recon, our air recon, of course we had air supremacy at that point, and they advised us they were forming for one last push, a banzai attack. And they were forming in an area that was about 1,000 yards square. Well, we had 35 battalions of artillery behind us, plus the narrowness of the island. We had naval guns coming in from both sides. And on a given signal, they all let loose on this 1,000 yard square. And we walked over it about 3 days later, and there was not a whole human being in the hole.
We had heard about the suicide planes before we pulled into the harbor, and we pulled into the harbor at Okinawa on the 10th of May, 1945. But the morning we got hit, there was 3 other planes, or 3 other ships, got hit by suicide planes, and after we had been hit, I was on a pointer on a 3-inch 50. And of course, after the planes get so close in, you have to stop firing. So just the 20s was firing. So we were looking around aft, and we happened to see a Navy transport ship loaded with personnel, and I saw a suicide plane dive into the side of that, hit it right in the superstructure. And of course, all these guys screaming, hollering, and jumping off into the water. But then, after we were hit, we couldn't leave our station. They said, you stay right here until we notify you. So that's when we got word on all this other stuff that took place. But now, when the plane hit us, it was 2 bombs. Small bomb which went off. And we didn't know this until we left 22 days later for San Francisco, when they wouldn't leave us in the harbor at San Francisco. And they sent us out to Anchorage, and we found out we had a 500-pound bomb in number 1 hole.
Wedged in.
That had, we understand it was the plane when it come down here was so fast that the didn't have the small bombs on the went home. Big one didn't.
How far away from you from where it hit? Were you from?
Well, I was on the aft part, and it hit up the bow.
Oh, okay.
It hit up
All right.
number 1 hole in the bow.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, we had 3 or 5 holes. 3. I don't really think I rated, Brad.
Really?
Yeah, because there was 3 guys that got named in here, wounded, and these other 2 guys was on 20 millimeters, just after the bow, at a 3-inch on the bow, but on the port and starboard is a 20 millimeter, and they were up on stands of, I'd say 30 feet above the main deck, and they got blowed clear out of both those guns down to the main deck. And me, back in that open gun tub, you know, where that 3-inch 50 was, that bomb fragments, all that stuff is hitting that gun tub and bouncing all over here. Boy, you couldn't hardly move any place. All you could see was, anyway, a piece of shrapnel hit me in the eye.
Oh.
Yeah. Huh. Now, just barely caught it, you know, and got in there, and the eyeball, they took it out. But there wasn't that much blood, I don't think, on the edge here, but still.
There were 13 of us operated out of this Kadena airfield, and there were some of those were Army, maybe 3 or 4 were Army and the rest were Marines, and we flew. If you're a Marine, you flew with a Marine pilot. If you were Air Force, you flew, or Army, you flew with an Air Corps pilot, and we would fly 3-hour shifts. Like if you'd fly start at 6 o'clock in the morning, fly till 9, then you'd have 3 hours off, and you'd fly from noon to 3, or you'd start at 9 and 9 to 12, and, or else 3 to 6. And we did that, I think, about 3 weeks. And, you know, every time you got back, you just heaved a sigh of relief, because we were flying out over enemy territory all the time. And we were flying in these planes that fly along at 85 miles an hour, and we lost 2 observers. And I don't know to this day, and I don't know that anyone really ever knew what happened to them, but they just didn't come back. And but you have to realize there were 36 field artillery battalions firing, and the Navy firing in from both flanks. And so we kind of figured that they must have gotten hit by a projectile up in the air, just blown out of the air.
Wow.
The Japs had a 37 millimeter, which they could adjust, and quite often when we'd be flying, why, you know, we'd see these bursts around us, where they had figured out our elevation and they weren't too far off. And the only thing I ever remember happening to an aircraft that I was in, when we get back, there'd be some bullet holes that probably were from small arm fire, because you know, that was the one thing they would try to do when a observer plane would come over. Anybody that had a gun would shoot at it. And, you know, we were flying maybe 100 feet elevation. But the thing about it, it was you would prefer to fly at 100 feet than you would at 1,000 feet, because, you know, something going 100 or 85 miles an hour 100 feet above you goes by pretty fast. But if it's 1,000 feet in the air,
okay.
you know, you make an easier target, really.
One Kamikaze covered in at us, and one of our gunners on the 40 millimeter started shooting at it, and he hit the nose of it just enough to tip it up, and it glided right over our deck. We could have touched it with our hands.
Is that right?
Touched the wheels when it went over.
Oh, geez.
And it had a big, looked like two 50-gallon barrels tied together underneath it, and we figured those were full of gasoline so that when it crashed it'd blow up and catch fire.
Oh, man.
But they went out and got the pilot out of that plane, which was dead, and they brought him aboard ship, and they found a billfold that he had a California ID card, driver's license, and an ID card for California State College,
Hmm.
and a picture of Betty Grable.